Chapter 19. Shadow Meets the Family. Following our script, Shadow opened the dinner wine for me and poured the first round. I distributed the arranged salads: lettuce, blood oranges, carved radishes, a bit of cheese with a drizzle of vinaigrette, and I lifted my fork to signal the start of the meal. Has anyone else been following the exploits of the mystery celebrity? Sally said, her fork still beside her plate. Someone at the Chronicle has been writing the wittiest stuff about him. Is that so? Amelia said. Who is he? They aren't saying. Actually, they say the guy's agent is threatening lawsuits, and you can see why, given what they say he's been doing. Anyway, maybe it's just someone who looks like him. As she finished, she caught my eye and raised a brow, as if I would have missed her point without the underline. Good heavens, is this still possible to do something that's shocking in San Francisco? Grant said. We all laughed, but my giggle was nervous. It sounded like there was something besides the underwear. So, what about this mystery celebrity? I asked, retrieving my fork from where it had fallen akimbo across my plate. Sally finished chewing. Well, it seems he's been in your neighborhood, practically in your backyard. Making a movie, is he? Amelia asked. Nope, Sally said. His agent says he's in Australia doing pre-production, but the Chronicle has other information. Their sources say he's been hanging out at the dog run in Mountain Lake Park. Hanging out? I said. Shadow was taking an extraordinary interest in his salad, not something he usually savored. Yes, he's there a couple times a week, people say. The dogs seem to recognize him, and they create quite a fuss whenever he shows up. A couple of times a week? Sally caught my eye. I suppose he must live nearby. Well, I don't see what's wrong with liking dogs, Sally, Amelia said. Grant has half a dozen dogs on his place in New Hampshire. Sally continued. The thing is, he doesn't seem to like dogs at all. Apparently, he runs after them, chasing them around the meadow, yelling, sometimes waving his shoes at them. I suppose that's why they bark whenever he shows up. The owners aren't so thrilled either. Shadow remained silent, but David was taking an interest in the subject. Sam, I said from the start that you look like that movie star. What's his name? Robert? Richard? I look exactly like him, Shadow said. That's why Alice asked me to grow the mustache. I stood up. Sam, I could use your help in the kitchen with the main course. Everyone was still busy with the salad, and mine was untouched, but something had to be done. You have to be more careful about what you say, I told Shadow as I pulled the roast from the oven. We don't want them thinking you're the man from that the Chronicle is writing about. But it is me. You've been hanging out at the dog run? He shrugged. It's in the park. That's where I go to get some exercise. Well, you really must stop chasing the dogs. Shadow couldn't resist a smile. I don't chase them unless they chase me first. But they always do. The grin got wider. Most of the time. Then maybe you should stay away from the park, I sighed. We'll talk about that later, but in the meantime, try to stick with the things we planned for you to say. I gave him the platter with the roast, and I brought another platter with seasoned couscous, and vegetables, which I set on the sideboard. Shadow took the roast to his seat, pushed his empty salad plate aside, and got ready to carve, something he had looked forward to, and did with relish. Did Sally tell you the underwear story, Alice? David asked. Can you imagine? $2,000 worth, and then not paying the bill? I suppose $2,000 is not so much if the underwear is silk and a silk linen blend, Amelia said. But who would wear silk underwear? David said. Shadow was holding the knife as if he might stab someone. I wear silk underwear, he said. It feels good. I like it. I threw Shadow a look that should have killed. And as things developed, I almost wished it had. Amelia stepped in. You really do look like that actor. I never remember the names. George something, I think it was. He played a doctor on TV. God damn it, How close can they get to skirting the fact that it's George Clooney? What does George Clooney look like with a mustache? I know what he looks like with 5 o'clock shadow. Let's see. George Clooney mustache. Oh. Oh no. Some of it's okay, but oh god. Oh. Just where it looks gross. And why is there a picture? What? Why is there a picture of James Franco when you Google George Clooney mustache? Okay, I don't even know anymore. Life is weird. And then you die. Let's see here. Practically every actor in the universe has played a doctor on TV at one time or another, I said. Trust me, Sam is no movie star. And before someone could pick up the thread, I wrenched the conversation in a new direction. Speaking of actors, Amelia, you're just back from New York City. What plays did you see? There have been many occasions when I wish that Amelia could describe a vacation without providing an hour-by-hour accounting of her activities, but on that evening I was happy for the distraction. Everyone loved Amelia, and her narrative was usually colorful, so no one interrupted. While she talked, we finished our salads and put them aside. Shadow and I passed the roast and the vegetables, and everyone ate, and she was still chatting. She ate like a bird, so she managed to clean her plate at the same time. By the time she arrived safely back in San Francisco, we had reached the quiet interval in most meals when plates are clean, silverware is set aside, and everyone focuses on digestion. Well, you've been rather grandly introduced to Alice's family, Sam, David said at last. I can't recall the last time we feasted so splendidly, and it wasn't a holiday. You should feel welcome. I do. David nodded. Alice promised we'd hear all about you tonight, so please tell us about yourself. What do you do when you're not making Alice happy? I'm always making Alice happy, Shadow replied, with a loving look that almost made me forgive his earlier transgressions. That's why I'm here. Well, I'm sure, David said. But perhaps you also have a job? Shadow had an answer to this question in his repertoire. Tell them you're in computer technology, I had said. They won't ask another thing. But for some reason, he'd forgotten his lines. After a pause that was just slightly uncomfortable, Grant coughed and Amelia giggled. In a crowd where no one has to work for a living, asking about career history is considered dreadfully middle class. My God, I just dislike this group of people. David, really, Amelia said. I don't mean to be rude, Sam, he went on in the politest possible tone. I'm just curious. You must have a hobby, an avocation, something that keeps you busy in the few seconds when Alice doesn't. Perhaps Shadow didn't recognize that there was a question here, I thought, since the sentence had been uninflected. The man of my dreams looked across the table at me, and I practically mouthed, computers. I read a lot, Shadow said, at last. Well, David said, what do you read? I read everything, he said, twiddling the corner of his napkin. Started with newspapers, and then I read signs. Lately I've been reading cookbooks. Amelia and Grant suppressed giggles, and I winced. Other books, too, of course. Books from the library, books from Alice's bookshelf, and websites. I like the web a great deal. You Google, I suppose. David's tone was dismissive. He believed that computers and the web represented an assault on Western civilization. This came out in 2008, right? Yeah, 2008. Oh my god. How old? How old is the author? Shadow smiled. I love to Google. How nice, Amelia said. Tell us what interests you. Just about everything, Shadow said. I spend most of my time reading about politics and religion. I held my breath, looking for a way to move the conversation in any other direction. Then he added, and cats. I'm very interested in cats, or at least in what people know about them. Cats, David repeated. What is there to know about cats? Exactly what I'd expect you to say, Shadow said, with only the slightest edge. People seem to know almost nothing. Certainly there are a few good books about cats. Most of them are picture books, really, and they talk only about pure breeds, I think you call them. People seem to be quite preoccupied with physical things about cats: how they look, how big they grow, the color of their hair, the length of it, the shape of their ears, the color of their eyes. And then, of course, there are books about what cats do and how people can train them. He paused, as if to get the foul taste of those last words out of his mouth. To do what people want them to do. Of course, cats aren't very good at that. He looked very cat-like when he grinned. But again, it's all about physical things, you see, when there's so much more to say. Shadow said the last, as if he wasn't at all sure what we would see. The cat-like arrogance was rising again. So you haven't found a book about cats that you like, David said, his amusement undisguised. The web is somewhat better. On the web you can meet individual cats, see how they live. It's appalling the conditions some have to put up with, stuck in small cages most of the day. Of course, there's almost nothing about the cat's family history, and what there is, I find rather inaccurate. At least it's an attempt to record our contributions, I suppose. Contributions, David said, feigning puzzlement. Ah, of course. You mean killing mice. No, Shadow said, his eyes fixed on me. Their green was overpowering, growing deeper and deeper. I could almost feel the muscles around them contracting so that they narrowed. Killing something else, then. What else do they kill? Birds, I suppose? But killing birds wouldn't be considered a contribution, now would it? Some people might consider it a crime. Shadow smiled. I've always been told that killing is the special talent of humans, the first creatures who killed for pleasure instead of food. Certainly, people do a lot of killing, sometimes with ceremony and often with relish. Cats, on the other hand, he continued, might kill for food, but we never kill for the simple pleasure of it. Of course, our species is older. I thought Shadow was doing pretty well with David, although I hoped no one was paying close attention to his pronouns. At least no one besides Alice, who was staring knives into the side of my head. Cats have been around longer than people, David asked. Oh, cats have been around longer than people? David asked. Why, I think the Egyptians are the first people to make mention of them, and men had been walking the earth a long time then. Weird sentence. Shadow stopped and looked at him with surprise. The Egyptians were the first people to leave a human record about cats. They treated cats like gods. The male was the sun god, the female was Bastet, goddess of joy and music, he said. And we were present long before Egypt built a civilization. As long as there has been a world in this place, cats have been making contributions. Please, David said, refilling his glass with wine, do share your research with us. Even some humans acknowledge our contributions, he said. Of course, they see it as from a people perspective, how cats were companions to great people. Michelangelo, Edgar Allan Poe, Winston Churchill. The books don't really discuss the relationship, what cats were doing with these great humans, how they fostered their work. Michelangelo? His cat, Poco, taught him a good deal about anatomy and motion. And Poe? Well, you know, Oberto was black, and he was no raven. And I suppose some cat helped Churchill win World War II? David exploded. That cat's name was Nelson, Shadow said with an apparent calm I found surprising, and several American presidents have had cats. Teddy Roosevelt had Slippers, Jimmy Carter had Mr. Malarkey-ing, Bill Clinton had Socks. Of course, most presidents have dogs, and Eisenhower banished cats from the White House. I think their respective contributions say everything about how important cats are to human leaders. I find this very interesting, Sam, Grant said. Does your research say anything about what cats contributed to political leaders? What? But that's just what he was talking about. The book says Nelson kept Churchill's feet warm at night, saving fuel for the war effort. We all laughed and laughed, if only in relief. For just a moment it seemed that Shadow had led us on an elaborate trail to the most charming of jokes, but as we began to quiet down, that illusion vanished. Warm feet are good, of course, Shadow said, and so is saving fuel. But that's That's a typically human disparagement of the cat's role. Nelson almost certainly had a more important mission. I suppose he sat down and helped Churchill develop a battle strategy, David said. I would expect so. After all, the British were on the winning side, and exactly how were they able to communicate? One meow for land, two meows for by sea. David's wit at dinner parties was celebrated, and I could see he was beginning a role. Not all cats, Shadow began, in words that made the hairs on my neck twitch, but certainly highly developed cats in their ninth life are able to take human form so that they can be of greater service to the humans they protect. Cats become men? David said. He and George and Amelia laughed, but Sally and I didn't join in. Nor did Shadow. And all of them are jazz aficionados, I suppose. Cool cats, as they say. I didn't realize there was a breed. The laughter grew. Even Sally sputtered a little, although I figured she must be quite convinced of Shadow's lunacy by now. Really, David, Grant said, you shouldn't laugh. Think about Bill Clinton. Imagine what kind of president he would have been if he wasn't always catting around. And to be honest, you're starting to look a great deal like the cat who swallowed the canary. David is no cat, Shadow said firmly. The family would never have him. David was laughing, and I don't think he meant to be mean or cruel with what he said next. Of course I'm not a cat. I'm just saying, Sam. It means I look like I've secretly pulled something off. There are dozens of sayings that relate to cats. You should get a book. Cat on a hot tin roof. Cat got your ton. Raining cats and dogs. Ah, yes. There's more than one way to skin a cat. Way to what? Shadow said. His face was very pale, and his eyes narrowed now as he leaned forward. Skin a cat, David repeated, and now a bit of malice may have entered his attitude. You know, remove the pelt. If I were doing the job, I suppose I'd start with the belly, slit it open with a long narrow knife, and then work the coat off little by little, keeping the fur in one piece. At least if the coat's as nice as the one on that cat of yours, Alice. David, how you talk, Amelia said, but she was smiling. Shadow stood at the end of the table. If you'll excuse me, he said. I told him to do that if he needed to pee, but I'd given him no instructions for that situation. Shadow glanced at me briefly as he left the table, and I didn't like what I saw in his eyes. I think I'd better go too. David took my arm. We were just making jokes. Doesn't he have a sense of humor? A guy who thinks cats turn into men should learn to take a bit of teasing, after all. I pulled away and raced through the kitchen toward the spare room, wondering if I could soothe Shadow and save the evening. It was late. When I opened the door, a furry gray blur nearly knocked me off my feet in its race toward the living room. I made it to the doorway just in time to see the cat leap directly from the floor onto David's back, his fur in full bristle. Shadow reached his front paws around David's throat, anchoring them and his back paws in the nubby knit of David's wool sweater, and then his fangs, there's no other word for them, sank into the gum line in David's neck. David, understandably, screamed and tried to grab hold of Shadow, but the cat easily eluded his grip, and then tore away and fled toward our bedroom. The party had come to a most dramatic climax.